In this video, I'll be discussing a really important, very relevant relationship dynamic that I think is essential for all empaths and highly sensitive people to be aware of. Once you identify the roles, it will help you see yourself and the relationship more clearly, and it'll give you a greater understanding of why the game is structured this way. We think it's a relationship, to them it's a game. So what I'm about to share with you will expose the specifics of this game. Knowledge of this reduces our emotional reactivity and it diminishes the triggers. But most of all, bringing this to light and being aware of it reduces our sense of isolation. I'm not going to go into the details in this video to clarify the differences between narcissist, sociopath, or psychopath. I'm just going to put them all under the same umbrella of the abuser, aka antisocial personality disorders. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to be using the term sociopath. There's a brilliant term that was developed by some really great psychologists, and it's called SEAT. And what SEAT stands for is sociopath, empath, apath, triad. Triad means three, that there are more than two in this relationship. It represents a triangle. And I really wanted to share this concept with this community because it really helped me make sense of things. And let's remember that this is not about judgment, but it's about discernment. And this is also known as a sociopathic transaction, because that's what it is. It's a transaction. We assume it's a relationship, but once you understand the specifics of the games that are being played, you'll realize it really is a transaction. So the sociopath is the person with the personality disorder. It's usually unrecognized, it's undiagnosed, and it's undetected. The empath is the individual who's highly sensitive, who's very empathetic to the emotions of others. And the apath is a person who's quite apathetic and they're willing to turn a blind eye. Abuse of other people is the activity of the sociopath that will stand out. In fact, you may recognize that the sociopath, psychopath, narcissist will brag about someone they've outsmarted. They'll talk proudly about how they took advantage of someone or how they deceived someone, how stupid someone was and how clever they were at getting away with it. So when you initially meet a sociopath, they will test you for your level of empathy. So questions discovering how empathetic you are will be used. So there'll be a display of false humility, like they care, just to suss you out and to reel you in to see if you're a suitable target. Empaths and highly sensitive people fall into this category because we're highly empathetic. We have the potential to expose the sociopath and to challenge their manipulative behavior. And that's because the empath is usually the first person who will detect that there's something wrong. When the empath or highly sensitive person who is very finely tuned to pick up deception and incongruency, or that there's something not quite right, the empath is forced to make a stand. And I think all of us can relate that it is unbearable for us to suppress a lie because it costs us greatly. Empaths and highly sensitive people really resist complying with the abuser. And our inability and reluctance to comply with the abuser causes us to be a target of their attack. So they will basically hate us because they can't control us. And the abuser will paint the empath as the troublemaker. So we will be labeled as the black sheep of the family. Basically, if you say no to their drama, to their manipulation, you've made yourself a target. So the empath will stand up and challenge the abuser. The sociopath will blame, distort, and lie, and attempts to assassinate the empath's character. Basically, the goal is to discredit and destabilize the empath, to make them appear crazy to others, or better yet, convince the empath that they are crazy. Because the sociopath sees the empath as such a great threat who can expose their manipulation, the sociopath can become aggressive and attacks the empath to stop this exposure, or to stop the empath from speaking out about the truth of what they've seen. The empath is a threat to the sociopath's dominance and superiority, simply because the empath or highly sensitive person can see beyond the lies the charm, and the insincerity. So the empath in this triad becomes the object of abuse. The third party in this triad is the apath, who is willing to deny, to minimize, and to turn a blind eye to the abuse. So the apath appears as an innocent bystander, apparently unable or unwilling to take responsibility, to see the abuse, or to protect the empath. They may appear to be not concerned by this behavior. This way, the apath becomes the enabler in this transaction, and it makes a sociopath feel more powerful because he uses the apath's passivity as justification that he is right. There's nothing wrong, and there's no need for this behavior to stop. An apath must be someone who is easily controlled, manipulated, basically someone who is unwilling to question the sociopath's behavior. Sometimes it's not easy to identify who the apath is, simply because they are loving people. They do have empathy and they do show concern for others, just not in this particular situation with the empath. The apath seems to be able to minimize their level of empathy towards the empath. So the apath does have a conscience, but it seems to diminish when it comes to the empath. And this triangle could consist of, for example, the mother being the narcissist, the father and the youngest daughter being the apaths, and the oldest son being the empath. So the abuser will play the empaths and the apaths against each other. Of course, always standing back and being the innocent victim. The one attribute that the apath must have is an emotional link to the empath. And the reasons why the apath needs to be emotionally connected to the empath is to maximize suffering. The apath could be angry with the empath, they could be jealous, they could be resentful, they could hold a grudge towards the empath that they cannot verbalize, or they're simply just unwilling to see anything bad about this situation. And the confusion and discomfort that both the empath and the apath feel causes distraction. It takes attention away from the true cause of the problem. This is very gratifying and invigorating for the abuser, who stands back and finds this entertaining. Usually both the empath and the apath won't be aware of this triangulation. It gives the abuser fuel or supply, and they are never accountable. Their goal is to innocently plant seeds to cause conflict and confusion, not peace or resolution. And apaths are generally very fearful people, and their apathy is an avoidance strategy. And they behave in a defenseless manner simply because they want to avoid any confrontation with the abuser, prevent any unpleasant reactions, which includes avoiding any potential way that the abuser could burst out into a rage. The apath is the peacekeeper, and they will value peace at all costs, even at the cost of abuse to the empath. So the apath is quite tolerating, quite allowing, and very passive. And this allows the abuse to continue, and it's certainly in favour of the abuser. Ultimately, this situation ends badly for both the empath and the apath, and particularly if the apath is haunted by guilt, or if the apath becomes the object of abuse themselves. And either way, all suffering is just supply for the abuser and affirms his dominance. So the apath eventually does fall victim to this psychological torture because they do have a conscience. And the sociopath knows this, and this is why the empath and the apath must emotionally be linked somehow. It makes it harder for either party to walk away from this relationship. And these psychological games and repeated trauma takes its toll, and it often presents as anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress for both the empath and the apath. And if you observe carefully, you'll notice that this relationship dynamic is rarely altered because it guarantees that they get what they want, which is control and manipulation of both. Sociopaths will attract via bribery, flattery, charm, and lies and storytelling. And if you're watching this video, I'm sure you're very familiar with the lengths that an abuser will go to control this game. And this very typical triad allows the abuser, the sociopath, narcissist, psychopath, to basically get away scot-free, to continue playing the victim, to go undetected, unpunished, and to continue the abuse. With all of this being said, the personality disordered will engage anyone for pure entertainment. Simply because they lack an inner life, they feel empty and get bored easily. They manipulate our compassion, prey on our forgiveness, and depend on us not setting boundaries. So knowledge of this dynamic allows us to develop a healthy sense of detachment. It allows us to own the parts that we play or recognize the parts that we ourselves weren't even aware that we were participating in. It can validate a lot of the feelings that we were confused by, and it will help us understand why we have always felt unwell, anxious, or generally very destabilized when we're in the presence of people like this. Knowledge also allows us to see that we have choices and how we can start responding from a more empowered state. If this information could impact someone that you know, please feel free to share it. And since this video series that I started for highly sensitive people has had such an awesome response, I will continue speaking and sharing more insights because I believe there is great value in sharing our stories. And to share what we've learned, because education is an essential part of us finding ourselves again.